printing press was 1400 something.
It
It was, but there was a German edition soon thereafter in 1500, and then it would have been published in English somewhat later. So the Psalter has these singing psalms, and it has other bits of the Bible in it, so it was a handy, quick reference. So what I want you to do now is to think about hymns, because that's what we also sing. So think about your favorite hymn and think about the words, and see if you can find words that relate to others. Or is your favorite hymn one about relating you and God?
One of my favorite hymns is the Summons, and I can't remember the exact words, but I like that. I like the way I feel when I sing it. I like the melody. It's pretty. And there's one. What is the one? I can't ever remember the names of songs. The one about the bird.
Oh, the sparrow?
Yeah.
God of the sparrow,
Yes,
God
God,
of the
oh, I
quail.
love that one. I love that one.
In the Bud There Is a Flower is one of
Yes.
my favorites.
Yes.
What song? In the Bud There Is a Flower.
Oh,
In the bulb, there is a
In the
flower.
bulb, there is a flower.
It's a song of promise.
Song of Promise.
That's it. That's it. I love that one.
That's
God of the Sparrow hymn is actually almost a narrative of creation through the crucifixion, and through our ultimate going to heaven. Because it says, "How do your children say home at the end?" And so it gives the whole almost perspective of our Christian experience.
I've always loved I Come to the Garden Alone, in the garden. And that's the one I told y'all that I used to sing to my mother when she was in the nursing home. She would always smile at me.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And I think it's reasonable that those are the hymns that give us comfort and give us a sense of belonging and maybe a promise that God is with us no matter where we are.
One of my favorites when I was a child was What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
That was my mother's very
I
favorite
just
one.
love that. I used to play it on the piano all
And Jesus loves little children.
the time. Yes.
I like Abide with me.
Yes. And those are all good. I think they are essential to our faith and essential to our building ourselves into doing what Jesus would want us to do. But I had a message from Wiley saying that he had read recently a commentary that said that the white churches in America had lost sight of their mission to minister to the poor, the needy, the oppressed. And so I was thinking about the hymns that we sing. The hymns are mostly for us, right? And we tend to sometimes forget who these people are that need us. So you know how you find things on your way to looking up something, you find something else. Well, there is a music group called Psalters. Has anybody heard of those? They're a Christian band, and they're punk rock.
Punk rock.
Heavy acoustics, folk punk, radical lifestyle of living in a semi-nomadic way. They have no home, they travel the country. They have intentional Christian community is what they are aiming for. And they have a worship of God which focuses on living out the gospel today. So if we are living out the gospel today in our lives, these are some of the things that they practice. They're pro-justice. Pro-justice
That's a good thing.
for all people. It's what's
The emphasis on working for justice is part of what I think about the last sentence.
I think it was just added, I don't think it was there
That's
originally.
right. In the new statement from the Reconciled Ministries, it's undergoing a process of revision and approval. Churches and organizations in the heart. The emphasis on justice to the oppressed and the poor, obviously the diverse population. The word justice is in
How often do we hear the word justice in our worship service or in our teaching?
Not that much.
We're singing it today. Micah 6:8, again from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of thee, that you do justly?
Oh,
That's one of our hymns today.
Yes. That's my favorite verse in the Old Testament.
yes.
So justice, why do we not like to think too much about justice? We say we want justice.
Well, it's a lot of work, and I feel like, gosh, I need to get busy. It makes me feel like, I don't do enough.
It requires doing. And we don't, sometimes we believe in something, but we don't want to get involved. We don't want to do the work to make it happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of obstacles to doing that work. Yes. I mean, it makes it difficult.
The trouble with the word justice is it involves you and me. You know, justice, you know, what do I want is justice, and what does somebody else feel is justice? You know, what justice somehow it's a resolution of conflict, and I think you can see where I'm going here. Whenever there's justice, there's a resolution of conflict, and then you go to, and immediately you're jumping to mercy and love and
Well, let's just make it just be justice and fairness.
justice and fairness.
Fairness
Okay.
and equality.
Yeah, but then that it goes back to the three people looking over the fence at the ball game now.
Okay, but it also,
You know, justice doesn't mean everybody gets the same necessarily. It's supposed to be just so that we all can live the same.
in our court system, what are your chances of winning a suit versus the chances of a black guy who has no money?
Better than his. Usually better than his.
Well, you can afford a better lawyer.
True.
What are your chances at recovering from an illness if you are poor?
Not as good.
Not nearly as good, because sometimes you can't go to the hospital when you're poor.
Yeah, look how North Carolina has cut the Medicaid, you know, and I was talking to somebody who works in Medicaid, and I asked if that had been corrected, and they said not yet.
And I don't understand why they fight.
Well, it was political.
I know that, but I don't understand why.
Why they were.
Why?
Turn it down.
Because I think everything is a zero-sum game. If I give to you, that means I have less.
Yeah, that's the
Which
bottom
That's the
is
line.
bottom line.
stupid.
And that's just not true.
But that's the bottom line, you know, selfishness.
It makes me very sad. I can remember when a friend, and I may have told this little memory that I have, her comment that the Affordable Care Act her child had an office, a medical office, and the new laws that they might have to cut one of their staff in something. Now, these were people who were doing well. Everybody in this group was doing well. And I said, and the thing was, I was doing well too. And I said, you know, I know I may have to pay just a little bit more when I go to the doctor. But I know a few people who have insurance now that did not have insurance before. And, you know, not that that was a big deal, but I hadn't thought of it in the sense of someone being against it. And that made me think of the fact that I knew people who were going to be taken care of that had not been taken care of before. And I'll shut up.
No, that's good. So should our feeling of justice extend beyond just saying the words? Should it extend to actually doing something?
Well, if we won't ever have justice unless we are willing to do something.
And sometimes it's just in our vote.
Yes.
Our vote.
That's right.
So what about people who use violence to get their way versus those who try to negotiate and vote and do it? Jesus certainly preached anti-violence, didn't he?
Yes.
You know, if you think about it, those who preach peaceful resolutions sometimes meet with a bad end. I mean, look at Martin Luther King, look at JFK, look at Jesus. Yeah.
They just couldn't control the crowds, you know.
Violence, I don't think, brings justice. I don't care what the people say their cause is. Have you ever known justice to come out of violence?
Well, you know, Wiley did this thing on a just war.
Yeah.
And war always means there's conflict that cannot be negotiated or diplomatically solved. So you have to force. When you have a child who's trying to run out in the street, you grab the child and pull them back. But nations can't act responsibly sometimes and need to be pulled back.
Factions were afraid of what Martin Luther King Jr. preached. They were afraid of his views and things, and I think that may have caused him to come to a bad end, and others who preach nonviolence and
I
justice.
was living in Memphis when he was killed, and the reaction to a lot of the black community was more violence.
Mhm.
Here they were having had him for their role model, and they ended up responding with violence. So,
And that has continued.
oh yeah.
That
Like
has
Rodney
continued
King.
through all the years. And I think that's one of the problems with white people. We don't understand why the black people can't work with us, and a lot of them do, but a lot of them get riled up and they do things. And now there's such a big group of white people who are getting riled up and just, it's this violent.
Let me ask you a question though. What do you think about teaching the philosophy of Martin Luther King to young children? The philosophy of what he wrote from his jail is incredible. And you know, we don't teach black history, but what do you think of how that would be something that would be helpful for all children, not just black children, but all children, to understand justice, to understand fairness, to understand love and compassion?
I think that if you put that to a group of white people in western North Carolina, they would react against it just because of the name, Martin Luther King. If there were no name associated with it, I think they would probably be okay. But I think our only hope is to help children to see better what the reality is. And how many times have I been with people, white people, neighbors and relatives, and they spout out something that I feel diametrically opposed to, but rather than confront them about it, I change the subject, or I say, well, you know, there's two sides to that, and move on to something else. But don't engage.
I've been in that same position. But I think if you put that idea that Margaret had to people in a great portion of Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, they would all have the same reaction that you said Western North Carolina would have. And yet, I feel very much like that would be a wonderful idea. But if the name is there,
But that is, those people are voters, and so politicians are going to walk carefully. And school boards are in a,
They can't teach much of anything. Even the math books were ruled out in
What's that
Florida
something?
because it
Yeah.
had something to do
40
with.
some books were,
that's ridiculous. The children of this generation are going to miss out on so much. And then we went through that period, and it still exists in some places, where they stopped teaching them cursive writing, which is going to affect what they read and understand in our history. To me, that's tragic. As a teacher, it's just tragic.
I lived in South Georgia for 30 years, and we had a very high rate of black people. And I saw affluent white people who, you know, when they were in church every Sunday and they had done extremely well financially, they would go to any extreme to keep blacks from having any power. You know, it would just hold the blacks in their place and we'll all get along beautifully and be good Christian people. We've got to hold them in their place. They would go to any extreme, you know, politically or whatever, to keep those black people down. And I mean even the black people who didn't cause problems. You know, I'm not talking about the violent criminal people. There are some blacks, just as whites, that are very criminally minded. That's their way of living. I'm not talking about those kind of people. I'm talking about just good, solid black people who had a lot to add, really. Would go to any extreme to keep the black man in his place, so that we can be on top.
All those states I just mentioned, same thing.
Well, don't you think that's part of what keeping them in their place is keeping that education from them?
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you look in history, some of us have studied some books recently. The black history takes up about this in comparison to our history. That is what's taught. A little sentence here, a little paragraph here, really.
Yeah.
And children don't know about black history. I did not grow up knowing much about black history. I've learned more in my philosophy group about that than anything. You know, I just didn't know. I was ignorant. I was kept at bay by my parents about what was really going on out there. I didn't know about Mississippi burning and stuff like that, and hanging, lynching, and all that stuff. My son says, Mom, it was going on when you were growing up. It was all around you. I said, I didn't know about it.
it wasn't in the newspaper.
Well, we didn't have 24/7 news. We didn't have Fox and CNN and MSNBC and things. Well, we just didn't have all these stations, you know. We had 3 little stations and you got news once a day. That was at night.
15 minutes.
Yeah, for about 15 minutes.
There
And
was
that
a
was
black man at Haywood Street, I worked with the homeless, and he was about our age. And he said and told us one day about how when he was young, living in Mississippi, you know, how that he was threatened constantly by white teenagers. And they would show him nooses they had made and threatened to drag him out to the woods. He said it was a constant fear, you know, the way he was treated.
See, I did
And
not
we think
know.
that didn't really happen, but this old man had nothing, you know, to lose to tell us this.
Joel, you had a comment.
I don't know if it was what Wiley sent out, but there was a recent article that I saw that said how the white evangelicals had basically destroyed the church.
They brainwashed people.
That
They still are brainwashing people.
And so they
I
just
think
omit.
the word that was used was failed, how
They
white evangelicals have failed the church. And it is, you know,
And the hymns. that
preaching the wrong message. It's not the message of justice.
Did you read that there was an anti-abortion demonstration in front of the courthouse in Marshall last week?
In Marshall.
Yeah, that's close.
Well, it was sponsored
They didn't
by,
call me. I would have
I'm
been
not
there.
sure who sponsored it, but it was published that it was attended by 2 local Baptist ministers.
One of them.
Not in Marshall.
Oh, I was
Yes.
thinking, one of them was from up at this end.
I'm just,
You know, if they really believe that, and if they really believed in having Medicaid and help for those babies all their life, I could listen to them and more often, but exactly. You know, just pro-birth, it's not pro-life.
Yeah.
I-
it's not equality.
No.
So.
See, I think a lot of times the church has oversimplified what Christianity is about.
Yes.
And it has dictated what? If you do this and this and this, then you belong in our church. You are a church person. And it's not necessarily the message of the universal church. It's people then go home feeling I'm doing everything right. And I have to be against abortion in order to be in that group, and I have to be against this and against this, and it's more conditional than open-mindedness. There is no open-mindedness there. It's being dictated to it. I remember my mom saying that we went to church and pretty much the minister told us, you don't have to think here, just do what we instruct. And for years, you know, the brain could be hung out there with the jackets and the coats. You know, you don't come in here to think, come in here to be brainwashed. Somebody mentioned that, but that's been the role of the conservative church for a long time, is to control. And
Yeah,
that's
and
why-
having grown up in the Methodist church, my church was not that way.
Not much in either.
Ours wasn't, and in fact, as a teenager in the '60s, you know, when the racial equality thing was coming before Congress and all, our church took a vote. It was a Baptist church, but our church took a vote of the church on a Sunday night business meeting that if any blacks wanted to come in our church, they were welcome. And the same, and we were across the street. I lived in Greenville, South Carolina. We were across the street from Bob Jones University, a very conservative, you know, Mecca. And we said if they want to come, they're welcome too. And so we had this welcoming concept back then, but there was no reaction like, well, we have to keep the blacks out, or we have to keep this out, and I'm so thankful to have grown up in an accepting church and an accepting family. Our family, I never hurt anybody, and our family was from Marshall and Swannanoa, my grandparents. Nobody in our family ever said a word that was racially said. And I did, and I'm like Connie,
Mine
you know.
did, and my daddy had black workers under him, and he treated them fairly. But my daddy obviously was a prejudiced man, and it hurts me to say that. But I know because of his language about blacks, I know how he felt. And he even made one statement, which I will not repeat to you, which just, I thought, no, you don't feel that way. He just did not, he didn't even think they had the intelligence that we have.
And we see a lot in these photographs when we see 2-year-olds, black and white, or brown, or whatever, working together, playing together. They had no concept that
Right.
No,
people are different colors, and we had this in our family that one of our younger daughter was in kindergarten perhaps, and there was a black kid in there with her, and she invited all her friends to her birthday party. And the mother called, one mother called and said, will there be any black students there, children there? And she said, yes, there will be one. She said, well, my child won't be coming. And she said, well, okay, goodbye.
There was a similar.
It's just like that hatred is that taught, you know, and it comes through the generations. If you leave the children alone.
The same thing happened with me. My kids were in Montessori school, and my daughter's best friend was a little black girl. And, you know, we invited her to the birthday party, of course. And we had the same reaction from some of the other ladies.
Well, it broke my heart that
That's interesting. That was in Indiana.
here
I
in
have
Mars
really-
Hill, there was in Dylan's room, there was a biracial boy that Dylan really liked, and they got along very well. And the biracial mother, who was white, the dad was not in the scene, planned a birthday party for the little boy at the park. She invited a lot of kids. We got there, and Dylan was the only child who was there.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was so sad.
I worked with this young woman at the University of South Carolina who wrote a book, and the name of the book is "'Cause I'm Me." And she was, and it's her story of growing up black. It is beautifully written. It is a wonderful story. If any of y'all would ever like to read it, it's a little short book. I'll loan it to you. But she's just, she's just so. She even talks about the prejudice between blacks, you know, because of the darkness of their skin.
Right.
And it's just a beautiful little story that I'd be glad to share.
I could, and again, I think, you know, enough, to me, it's all comes down to economics in the end. I remember, I grew up in a home until I was about 11th birthday, I came home, so 6th to 8th grade was with my dad, before I went away with the Franciscans. But I had no clue about prejudice or anything like that until I was 11 years old, and I started playing with the kids across the street, and they were talking about the blacks over on Guthrie Street, and stuff like that. I remember talking to my dad about it after, what's it about, and he says, well, over here they have blacks, in Europe they have the Jews. And it's always a matter of who has and who doesn't have, and if you feel that the people that have the most of the excess of an economy are the people, as a rule, that are most invested in not having a change occur. And you know, it's just the way it is, and it goes back to the zero-sum game that Judy mentioned a little while ago. And Jesus' whole message is, there's enough to go around. We gotta worry, we gotta feed these 5,000 people, what are we gonna do? And calm down, everything's gonna be fine. Some kid comes up with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and before the thing is all done, they have leftovers for 5,000 people. And the thing is, the fear. They're gonna take away what you have. If somebody's invested, they get everybody else to be afraid. And if you can get something that you can actually point to, if you have a black skin, there's something to point you right away. At least you're not black if you're in the poor mountains of Appalachia. And you never went so far as put stars on their coats so we know who they are.
That's because they didn't have any distinguishing racial feature that would automatically identify them as the other.
Yeah.
It's the other. So we have to fight constantly against that tendency in ourselves.
And we're the idea, we give in church. Where did that come from? Well, it's the whole Jesus message. You don't have to hold on to, you hold on to this life, then you'll have nothing. I can't remember what the exact quote is. Those who hold on to life shall lose it, I believe is the.
We give in church, that's true, and our church, through the Methodist organization, can do things that we can't. But I still think that we have the responsibility to act as well as we can. And sometimes we sell ourselves short. We say, I can't do that because.
I think your key word was act.
We have to act.
I have come so far in my thinking that sometimes I can't believe it. I did not, this is gonna come as a shock to y'all. Maybe not Margaret, maybe not Mary Lou, but the rest of you. I did not eat in a restaurant with black people in there eating at a table until after I moved to Mars Hill. After I was married and had kids. And may have had Chris too. And I can remember going to Asheville, and I don't remember which restaurant it was, but we were eating in a restaurant, and a black family came in, and I remember saying to Bob, I was not uncomfortable at all, but it was strange to me. And I said, Bob, I've never eaten in a restaurant with a black person, ever. And our help never ate at the table with us, ever. And Mama always prepared the meals. The help did not cook. They mainly cleaned and ironed being the biggie. But I can remember the day that my mother called me and she said, you're just not going to believe this. I got Viola to sit down and eat with me today. Now this was long after my daddy died. This was in like 1992 or something. I mean, that's kind of recent to me, but anyway, Mama called me and she said, I finally just told Viola that this is the silliest thing in the world. It's just the two of us in this house. And there's no sense in me eating and then you eating. Same table, same food. She said, I want you to sit down on this Mildred. I can't do that. I mean, this went on for probably years. Finally, Mama said, nobody is gonna know we're eating together but us, and you are my friend. You are going to eat with me today. And Viola sat down at the table, probably shaking, you know, but she sat down at the table. And I thought that was incredible from my mother to insist on that. It made me feel like we were coming in to the 20th, at that time, the 20th century.
Sounds like driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah.
You know, exactly. But it took them until they were much older,
Yeah.
and then they realized, you're my best friend, you
Yeah.
know. And,
Your mama talked to Viola about everything, and Viola, and during the 60s, when all that was going on, and the black people were told, don't you go to that white grocery store. And when I would go home to visit, Mama would say, I want you to go get her groceries. And then you take her home and make sure she gets in the door all right. Now, I was putting myself in peril because of the grocery bags, you know, and all, and Viola didn't much want me doing that. But I said, no, I'm gonna do this. We're gonna get you home and you're gonna have groceries and you don't have to go to that little store that's just serves the blacks. I said, you can get groceries and we're gonna get you home all right. But I remember the looks that I got when I was driving into the little part of town. We won't say what that was called. But I took her home, you know, but I felt so good that my mother sat down, and from then on, they ate together. When it was lunchtime, they sat down and ate.
I really felt like I'd arrived once. You don't feel that way very often. But I had a black lady that was my teacher's aide in my classroom. And so she was getting married, and she was about 30-something. She was excited, she was finally, getting married. And she said, Miss Judy, that's what she called me, she said, can I have my wedding reception in your yard? And I just took that as the biggest compliment. And she ended up then breaking up with the guy, didn't it? But I said, of course you can. And I just took that as the best thing that she could say to me, that she felt like that I would accept her, So of course, some of my neighbors probably would have burned my house down, But the fact that she would ask me just made me feel so good.
Well, there is opportunity for growth, so let's be aware of that. And I keep thinking that maybe we could reach out to the students who are minority students at Marsdale College, because sometimes they have a tough road if they get out of the bounds of the city limits or go anywhere except to Asheville. I had, when David and Abraham were kids, they once drove out to a part of the county that was not receptive to their being there, and were told to leave in no uncertain terms, just because they were so.
What is, tell me,
Clement.
What?
Isn't it Clement?
I couldn't remember his name. I want to call him by name.
Yes, Clement is his name.
Well, haven't Paul and Paula just taken him other ways? It's like a
They're
son
doing
with them,
such a
isn't it?
good, see, it can be done, and it can, I think, have great benefits. I learned more from David than I wanted to learn when he was trying to give me a gift. They worked for me some, and I asked him how much I owed him. He said, no, we're doing this today as a gift to you. And I said, no, I want to pay you. And he said, Miss Crum, you need to learn how to accept a gift. So,
Graciously.
yes.
And just hush.
That's not something that's limited to blacks, though. I remember Riley telling me about the community they lived in north of here. It was a remote community, and they were not receptive to he and Emily coming into that community. It's
It's called sodomy.
Oh, that's just Shelton Laurel.
It's
You know,
problem.
We're so much better, we're down here in Martell. Yeah. It's a shame.
But we are a part of the county.
And they overcame that, they became a real part of this community.
Well, he would go down and sit around when they were playing checkers and stuff and get to know them.
That's
didn't he?
right.
At their little store. Yeah, sometimes I think we have to make that first move.
Right,
You know?
not just to wait till, we say we're a reconciling church and you are welcome here. But that puts the onus on the person getting nervous to go in this white enclave of older people, so.
How many of you have ever had a black person attend a church and those poor people are swarmed by everybody coming up to them?
Yeah.
It's just
We
that
do
could
that
be
here.
overwhelming.
We do it here.
But we do that to everybody.
Yeah, we do it.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
walk
yeah,
through
yeah.
there.
I think I might have done that a little bit with Clement, I said, well, I did.
No, he's happy. I think he's happy. Okay, so tune in next Sunday. Keep your eyes open for ways that we can be a more proactive church.
Two of her best friends, I think they were best friends, two black ladies, lived not in the black community, but kind of over here where she lived, a little bit out in the country, in the Rollins Creek area. But they were such good friends, and they spent time together, and it's what was so funny, was the black ladies got commodities, remember, I don't know if any of you know, but back in the
Yeah, I know
50s,
what that is.
the government provided
Cheese and peanut butter.
So-
Awful
So,
cheese.
no, it was good cheese.
Ours was low.
So these two women shared their commodities with my Aunt Flora. So they would share, they didn't like, they thought that, they agreed with you, they didn't like that cheese, so they gave it to Flo and grits. I remember cheese and grits, I don't know what else they got. I do remember good cheese. But it was funny because, and I don't know how they got to be such good friends, but they were friends, like, they would sit down together, didn't go places, because you didn't do that then. This was probably in 1955 or something like that. It was fun.
When I was a little kid, I loved to play in the gutter. And maybe that says something about me.
She means the day.
Yeah, well, this was the gutter because I lived in the city. But I was out playing in the gutter one day, and it had rained, so there was water, and I was floating leaves or whatever down the gutter. And this little boy came up, and he wanted to start playing with me. And so we were playing, and we were having the best time. And I got home, and one of my family members had crawled out on the roof and taken a picture of me playing with that little black boy. I still have that picture because it was such a weird thing that had happened. We didn't live far from the large black community in Memphis. It's called Orange Mound. It's a huge black community. It's almost as big as the one in Los Angeles. But I remember thinking, what's the big deal? He was fun, nice little kid, you know.
Well, my piano teacher, when I was, I guess, in probably the 7th grade, 8th grade, somewhere along in there, that age, probably not high school. But my piano teacher had a little separate kind of part of her house there. We grew up there.
Yes.
And, she had, I don't know, half a dozen students and 2 little black girls in the community. And so Mary Ann and her sister's name Jackson were just part of our little group. We had recitals together.
Did anybody take a picture of him?
Not that I'm aware of.
Too bad.
But my piano teacher was unusual for her time. She was
Musician, you know, they're usually willing to
to
stand out.
not to be, parochial or whatever, but she was Presbyterian. She was important part of the church that I grew up in. So she had different ideas for that place.
Well, I think of my grandchildren now, they have no opportunity for interacting with anybody different from them. It just happens to be the way it is in Marcel.
Right.
I mean, there's nobody to interact with that's different.
That's the way it was when my
So
boys
you
were
want,
growing up.
you know, it's hard for them to be
Yeah, but Barnett was
learning.
one of my boys' friends, you know, but he was like the only one.
But that would be the responsibility, I guess, in a community like this, to go and find folks.
There's some Hispanics, and sometimes they get
Yeah, and
equal bad.
yeah. The roads is in, some because it's, old roads and all. It's a really
It is, there is no diversity.
Well, there's a Hispanic guy, really neat guy that's helped me some, I met him, Judy, Ed, and he told me one, or told me one of us, he said he has to be so careful because if he's speeding or something.
Oh,
Because
yes.
he's illegal,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's made of gold, I mean,
He's a wonderful person.
And they
We're not saying.
the other few weeks